So welcome to video number 3. This video is going to actually explore the use of the Blanketrol. So I'm just going to go over how to set it up and a few little operational issues. So let's begin with, before we start, we're going to turn the machine around to the back and lift up. And what you're going to see is this hole right here. That hole is where you fill with water. So you're going to look in. If you can see water inside, then you're good. If not, add some water, and it needs to be sterile water, not tap water. And so I can see there's lots of water in mine, so I'm good. I am going to now come right here and turn my machine on. I am now going to come to the side, so the opposite side, and look down here. So I'm going to have a blanket beneath my patient and above my patient. So I need to have 2 sets of cables. So this one here is going to go to one blanket below the patient, and this one is going to go to a blanket above the patient. So it doesn't matter which one goes where. And you will see that there are connections. One is an in and one is an out. Now I'm going to go get my disposable blanket, and I am going to connect. So here is my blanket. It's a nice, soft, conducting material. And I'm going to find the end, excuse me, that has the tubings. And so I'm going to take one of the cables, and I'm simply going to snap these. They friction fit, and you'll hear a click. Friction fit. To remove them, just push in on this metal part and they come apart. So friction fit. Now this blanket is ready to go. And I do the same for my other set of tubing. Now we'll turn our attention back to the machine itself, and just let me get some materials out of the way here. And we're back to our video of the Blanketrol. So I've turned it on. I want you to think of the set temp button as kind of the home button. So we are going to cool this patient, and we are going to cool him to between 32 and 34 degrees. So I have one blanket underneath the patient, one blanket on top. Make sure all my clamps are open on the tubings. I'm going to hit set temp, and I'm going to use my down arrow to set this at 34 degrees. So I want to cool my patient very quickly. And so I can push and hold, or I can continue to push. Now I'm set at 34 degrees. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to push the auto control. And it is alarming right now that tells me check probe, because I do not have a temperature probe installed in the patient or the machine. So I am going to go back and hit temp set. That's kind of my home button. And I am going to look in here, the little front opening, and I'm going to get the cable that friction fits into the side of the machine. And then the other end will connect to either your esophageal probe or your Foley catheter, however you are measuring your temperature. What I'm going to do is insert my simulator. I'm going to insert my simulator in the side here so that I can simulate patients' temperatures. And so I'm going to go back to my setup. My set temp is now at 34 degrees, and when I push my auto control, it comes up and it tells me my patient temperature right here is 38.7. My water temperature is 25. Water is going to start circulating through both of the blankets. And this water temperature can go down as low as 4 degrees. In the auto mode, the philosophy is get the patient down as quickly as possible. And so water is filling the blankets, and I'm simulating my patient's temperature dropping. It wouldn't drop immediately, but our plan is to get to target temperature within 4 hours. And so my patient's temp is 33.8. And very shortly, this blanket is going to recognize that the patient's temperature is below what we have set it at. And it will stop cooling. It won't stop monitoring, but it will stop cooling. The water temperature will no longer drop. So once you have reached in the auto control mode, once you have reached your targeted temperature, you're going to go to temp set again, and you are going to lower it to 33, because that's where we want our patient to be, right exactly at 33. Then you are going to hit gradient 10, smart mode. And if you remember from the previous video, the reason why we're doing that is so that the water temperature here is never more than 10 degrees away from the patient, either above or below. And we use the smart mode button. We can only use smart mode when we use gradient 10 or gradient variable. And what that does is every 30 minutes, the machine takes a look at the patient's temperature and says, are we at temperature, at set temperature? If the answer is no, then the machine decides, do I have to warm the water or cool the water? And that will be dependent on what the patient's temperature is. If the machine has to warm the patient, then the water temperature will increase by 5 degrees. If the machine had to cool the patient, then the water would cool by 5 degrees. So it adds or takes away 5 degrees to achieve your set temp. Let's say we were unable to achieve target temperature in the gradient 10 mode, that the water was just not cool enough to keep the patient's temperature cold. Then I could hit temp set and go to gradient variable. And when I look at gradient variable, it says offset 0 degrees. I have to put the offset in. So in the gradient 10, it was 10 degrees difference. So let's try, we want to cool this patient a little bit more. Let's try a gradient of 15 degrees. and then hit gradient variable again. Additionally, we hit the smart mode button. So gradient 10 will be good for cooling most patients, but in those difficult patients who you're not able to maintain at target temperature, or maybe they are dropping, you could also change your gradient variable to 8 degrees. The company recommends that you do not set it any less than 7 degrees, just because we're surface cooling. We're trying to achieve a core temperature. Sometimes there is quite a difference between core temperature and what the surface is. And so 7 degrees is kind of the max that they want the gradient to be at. So there's a gradient 10, which is what we use on most patients. But if you're not able to achieve that temperature, then you would hit the temp set button to stop it, go to gradient variable, and you would manually put the temperature offset into the machine. Always use the smart mode when you're using gradient 10 or gradient variable. It just is an extra eye on the patient, keeping tight rein. And so you'll see, sorry, excuse me. You'll see that the water temperature when we first started out was at 25 degrees. Temperature has significantly dropped, and now the temperature of the water here is 19 degrees. And so that is really all there is to using this blanket. It is sometimes a trial and error. It is very non-invasive. The material that the blankets are, disposable blankets are made of, is really quite lovely. You do not need a sheet between the patient and the disposable blankets. But I'm going to show you a product. This particular product here that comes with its own extension cable. This is a reusable blanket. So check with your infection control center to see how they recommend cleaning it. The company suggests that we not use alcohol, it will break down the material. However, we can use chlorhexidine swabs and wipes, so that's what we use here, our regular AccuCure swabs. I shouldn't call them swabs, wipes, and we wipe it down. I think it's good practice that you do it after a patient is done with the blanket, but also prior to adding it to a new patient, just as an extra precaution. There is also a silence alarm if you can't figure out what is happening and it may be distressing you or the patient. You can hit the silence alarm. Temp set stops it, and then you can go to anywhere. The manual control is not something that we use in the New Brunswick Heart Center. The manual control only allows you to set the water. It doesn't even require that you have a temperature probe into the patient. Only the water temperature gets assessed. So I don't find it particularly useful. But one that I do use is monitor only. And so down here in the corner, monitor only. After you have rewarmed the patient and you want to keep a tight rein on what his temperature is to ensure it doesn't go above 37, you can use the monitor only mode. And that will just give you a continuous readout of the patient's temperature up here in the underneath patient. And so that is the Smart Hyperthermia blanket. If you have any questions, then please feel free to give me an email, susan.morris@horizonnb.ca. Thank you for your attention.